For almost half a century, the entire world lived under this constant shadow, this threat of a war that could have literally ended everything. You had two massive superpowers armed with weapons that were just terrifyingly powerful, facing off in this global chess match for dominance. So we're going to dive into this incredible era of tension, of spies, and a rivalry that really shaped the world we are all living in today. This is the story of the Cold War. And that right there is the central puzzle of the whole thing, isn't it? I mean, think about it. A 45-year struggle that pulled in the entire globe, pushed technology to its absolute limits, and brought us right to the edge of total annihilation. And yet, the two main players never actually officially declared war on each other. How does that even happen? The name itself is pretty fascinating. It actually came from the writer George Orwell way back in 1945. He basically predicted a future with this nuclear stalemate between what he called monstrous superstates, where a normal hot war was just impossible. And wow, was he right. This wasn't a war fought with armies on battlefields. It was a war fought in the arenas of ideas, money, and who could build the coolest stuff. So, where did this all kick off? Well, the Second World War II ended. That shaky alliance between the US and the Soviet Union just started to crumble. Yeah, they'd beaten a common enemy, but their ideas for what the world should look like afterward, they couldn't have been more different. And that set the stage for a totally new kind of conflict. At its core, this whole thing really boils down to two completely opposite ways of seeing the world. On one side, you've got the United States championing capitalism, democracy, and individual rights. And on the other, the Soviet Union, absolutely determined to spread its model of communism, where the state and a single party controlled every single aspect of life. This wasn't just a simple political disagreement, it was a fundamental fight over the very idea of how human society should work. And with that one single powerful phrase, Winston Churchill gave the world the perfect picture of this new reality. To the west of this line, you had the democracies influenced by America. To the east, the communist states completely controlled by the Soviet Union. They were separated by this barrier that was as much about ideas as it was about barbed wire. The Iron Curtain wasn't just a metaphor. It was very, very real. But, okay, this huge ideological divide was about to become infinitely more dangerous because a brand new technology, the atomic bomb, was thrown into the mix. And it didn't just change the rules of war, it changed the rules of everything. This is the ultimate chicken and egg question of the whole era, right? The atom bomb was created before the Cold War really got going, but when the US used it to end World War II, Stalin saw it as a direct threat, like a power move. And that deep suspicion, that fear, is what kicked off this desperate, terrifying race to build more and bigger bombs. And just look at how fast this all happened. The American monopoly on the bomb, it lasted just 4 years. Then, only a few years after that, both sides had the hydrogen bomb, a weapon literally hundreds of times more powerful than the first one. The stakes were just getting unbelievably high. This created a really strange situation. The very weapons that made these superpowers so incredibly powerful also made it impossible for them to actually fight each other directly. Both sides knew that if one of them launched their missiles, the other would launch theirs back, and the result would be, well, the end of the world as we know it. This terrifying idea is exactly what kept the Cold War cold. Okay, so if direct war is completely off the table, where does all that rivalry go? It had to go somewhere else. So it went up, into space. The fight for whose system was better moved to the final frontier. And at first, the Soviets were winning, big time. They stunned the world, first with Sputnik, that little beeping satellite, and then by putting the first man, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit. Each one was a huge propaganda win, seemingly proving that communism was the future. But the US responded with this incredibly bold goal, landing a man on the moon. And in 1969, they did it. And that moment is still seen by so many as the symbolic finish line of the space race. But here's the part that is truly mind-blowing. This crazy race for the stars had huge effects right here on Earth. I mean, to solve the insane challenges of space travel, scientists had to invent all sorts of new things. The GPS in your phone, the microchips in your computer, even medical tech like MRI scans. So much of the technology we use every single day has its roots right here in this intense competition. But even with this stalemate, the danger of everything going wrong never, ever went away. In fact, there were a few moments when this Cold War came terrifyingly close to turning red hot. And no place on Earth was a more dangerous flashpoint than Berlin. Just picture it, a little island of Western democracy and capitalism sitting more than 100 miles inside the communist bloc. It was a constant source of tension, a real symbol of this divided world. And the crisis there just kept escalating. First, the Soviets tried to starve West Berlin with a blockade, but the West beat them with this massive airlift. Then, as millions of East Germans kept escaping to the West, the Soviets built the Berlin Wall, literally overnight. It all came to a head in this terrifying standoff. American and Soviet tanks, nose to nose at Checkpoint Charlie, engines running. One wrong move could have started World War III. But the single most dangerous moment of the entire 45-year period happened a year later. The U.S. discovered the Soviets were installing nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. For 13 days, the entire world just held its breath, closer to nuclear Armageddon than ever before or since. Thankfully, through some secret back-channel deals, the crisis was averted. But the experience totally spooked both sides. It was this terrifying look into the abyss, and it proved that when it came right down to it, neither leader was actually willing to push the button. And that realization led directly to the very first major arms control deal, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It was a small step, but it was a step back from the brink. So after decades and decades of tension, the end of the Cold War, when it finally happened, was shockingly fast. All that insane military spending, plus the fact that the communist economic system just wasn't working, was really taking its toll on the Soviet Union. Then, a new kind of leader came to power in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. He knew the system was failing, so he introduced these radical reforms, hoping to save it. But what he actually did was open the floodgates. He loosened the Communist Party's total grip on power, and that changed everything. And the collapse happened like dominoes falling. First, the communist governments across Eastern Europe fell, one after another. Then came the big one, the most incredible symbolic moment, the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989. And just 2 years after that, the Soviet Union itself was gone. And just like that, the global fight that had defined the entire second half of the 20th century, the one that had threatened all of humanity, it just ended, surprisingly peacefully. But that leads us to a final, really big question. The war between American-style democracy and Soviet communism? That's over. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. But what about the bigger dynamics? The competition between superpowers, the battles for influence, the global tensions? Those are still very much with us. So the Cold War might be history, but you have to wonder if its echoes are still all around us today.